The day Sebastian Whitmore lost his fortune, the first thing he noticed wasn't the empty bank account, the frozen credit cards, or the reporters camped outside his mansion. It was the sound of a suitcase wheels dragging across marble. He stood at the top of the grand staircase in his Beverly Hills mansion, watching the woman he thought loved him more than money rush toward the front door. She didn't look back. She didn't ask if he was all right. She didn't even glance at the old housekeeper crying quietly in the corner. She simply grabbed her designer handbag, pulled her suitcase behind her, and vanished through the enormous wooden doors. Sebastian closed his eyes. For months, he'd wondered whether people loved him for who he was, or for the fortune attached to his name. That morning, he'd finally decided to find out. He'd secretly arranged for his financial team to make it look like his entire empire had collapsed. His accounts were supposedly frozen, his properties facing foreclosure, his company drowning in debt. He wanted to see who would stay once the money disappeared. What he never imagined was that the first person to leave would be the woman he was about to marry. If you believe kindness, loyalty, and second chances are worth more than money, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this story, and subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out what was truly worth keeping. Sebastian was 42, and he'd spent most of his life turning Whitmore Holdings from a small investment firm into one of California's most successful private real estate companies. His name showed up in business magazines, at charity galas, in newspaper headlines. He owned luxury hotels, commercial properties, a handful of tech investments. But behind all that wealth was a man who'd learned early that money could never buy loyalty. His father died when Sebastian was 26, leaving him a struggling company and a mountain of responsibility. He worked 18-hour days, slept in his office more nights than he could count, and turned every failure into a lesson. By 40, he'd achieved everything people said would make him happy. Everything except certainty. Then he met Victoria Caldwell. Elegant, sharp, beautiful, effortlessly at home in wealthy circles. Things moved fast. Within a year, she was living in his mansion, on his arm at every charity event, wearing the engagement ring he'd bought her on a private trip to New York. Sebastian believed he'd finally found someone who saw the man underneath the money. But there was one person who'd never seemed impressed by any of it. Her name was Clara Bennett. Clara had worked in the Whitmore household for almost 7 years. She was 34, quiet, hardworking, and deeply kind. She'd grown up in a small Ohio town before moving to California after her mother fell ill, taking whatever work she could find until she became the family's housekeeper. She never asked Sebastian for favors, never tried to impress Victoria, never treated his expensive things as anything special. When he forgot to eat because of work, she'd quietly leave a warm meal outside his office door. When she noticed him sitting alone late at night, she'd set down a cup of coffee without a word. Sebastian sometimes thought Clara might be the only person in his life who treated him like an ordinary man. Then came the test. One Monday, Sebastian gathered his financial advisors and told them to stage a financial disaster. No employee would actually lose their job. No real investor would lose a cent. Every major asset stayed protected. The whole thing was built to look catastrophic on the surface while staying completely controlled behind the scenes. The news spread fast. By afternoon, networks were reporting that Sebastian Whitmore's empire was collapsing under crushing debt. His accounts were supposedly frozen. Several luxury properties were reportedly headed for foreclosure. Rumors said he could lose the Beverly Hills mansion within weeks. Sebastian came home that evening in the same dark suit he always wore, but deliberately left off his expensive watch and had his assistant strip every visible sign of wealth from his office. Victoria showed up less than an hour later. At first, she seemed worried, asking about the properties, the banks, the wedding. But as the evening wore on, her worry curdled into panic. Sebastian watched it happen. He told her his lawyers were scrambling to save whatever they could, that he might have to sell the mansion, that the lifestyle she'd grown used to could disappear entirely. He even floated postponing the wedding indefinitely. Victoria looked at him like he'd become a stranger. That night, she packed. Clara saw her hauling designer clothes into suitcase after suitcase, watched her lift jewelry out of a bedroom drawer, and tuck it into a velvet case. Clara wanted to believe there was an explanation. Maybe Victoria was just scared. Maybe she'd calm down and stay. Then she noticed something that broke her heart. Victoria wasn't packing anything sentimental. She was taking everything valuable. The next morning, Sebastian found the engagement ring sitting on his desk. Victoria was gone. No emotional letter, no promise to come back, no question about whether he was safe. Just a short note explaining she couldn't build a future with a man who had nothing left. Sebastian read it twice, then sat alone in his office staring at the ring. For the first time in years, the billionaire felt poorer than he'd ever felt in his life. But the story didn't end there. That afternoon, Sebastian wandered into the kitchen and found Clara making soup. She'd already heard about Victoria, but she didn't ask what happened, just set a bowl on the table and kept working. Sebastian watched her for a moment, then asked why she hadn't left too. Clara said simply that she hadn't stayed for the mansion, the paycheck, or anything she might get out of it. She'd stayed because Sebastian had once helped her family when her mother needed medical care, and because whatever his flaws, he'd never once treated her like she was less than a person. Those words hit Sebastian harder than any business failure ever had. He suddenly saw how cruel his little experiment had been. He'd wanted to know if people loved him for his wealth, but he'd forgotten that real love isn't something you're supposed to trap inside a test. He called his financial advisors immediately and shut the fake bankruptcy story down. The truth came out within days. The company had never actually been in trouble. His assets were untouched. The whole crisis had been staged from the start. The papers eventually reported that Sebastian Whitmore had survived the crisis. He no longer cared about the headlines. He cared about the people he'd nearly lost to his own fear. He tracked down Victoria a few weeks later through a mutual friend. She'd already moved into another luxury apartment and was telling people Sebastian had deceived her. He didn't argue. He told her she had every right to be angry, admitted that faking a bankruptcy to test her love had been wrong, and apologized for turning love into an experiment. But he also told her the one thing he'd finally understood. He could forgive her for leaving when she thought he had nothing. What he couldn't forget was that she never once asked if he was okay. They ended things peacefully. Then Sebastian did something nobody expected. He sold one of his luxury properties and started a foundation in his mother's name to help families facing financial hardship. He began spending more time with the people who'd been invisible to him during all those years of chasing success. And Clara? She kept working in the household until Sebastian offered her a new role running the foundation's community programs. She only said yes after making sure it would actually help people instead of becoming another PR stunt. Over time, their friendship deepened. No sudden fairy tale romance, no dramatic wedding, no overnight transformation. Just small moments. Sebastian learning to listen, Clara learning to trust, two people finding out that real affection can grow quietly, without expensive restaurants, cameras, or diamonds. One rainy evening, months after the scandal had faded from the news, Sebastian came home and found Clara by the window, going through applications from families asking for help. He looked around the mansion. For years he'd believed these enormous rooms were proof of his success. That night, they finally felt like something else. They felt like home. Sebastian had once believed he needed to lose everything to find out who truly loved him. In reality, he needed to lose his illusion of control. The woman he expected to stay had run because she loved the life around him. The woman he never thought to test had stayed because she cared about the man inside it. That was the lesson Sebastian carried for the rest of his life. Sometimes the person who walks away when your money disappears isn't your greatest loss. Sometimes their leaving is the answer you were too afraid to hear. True love doesn't ask what you own. True friendship doesn't calculate what it can gain. And true kindness often comes from the person you least expected to notice you at all. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes people are worth more than their possessions, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories about kindness, loyalty, and second chances. And before we go, one more thing. Comment, love is more than money. If you believe someone's true character shows itself when there's nothing left to gain. Because Sebastian spent his whole life building an empire worth millions, only to discover that his greatest fortune was never in a bank account. It was in the quiet loyalty of the one person who stayed when everyone else walked away.